No. That title doesn't contain a drop of hyperbole on my part. I genuinely believe that Scarlet and Violet, or SV as I'm going to call them for the remainder of this video, are in fact peak Pokemon. Wanna know why? Well, stick around. But first I gotta mention that this is, in a way, sort of a spiritual successor to my video on Sonic Frontiers. It tackles more or less the same topic of subjectivity in video games, but it's explored in way more detail in that chunker of a video essay. You don't need to watch it to understand this one, but it might be easier to see where I'm coming from if you go through it first. Besides, that video is kind of my magnum opus, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Aside from the audio, which, to be honest, is still a work in progress, there's still a chance this video will sound bad too, I'm aware. And I'm sorry, I'm doing my best here. So, shoo, go watch that, then come back here and watch through this too. I promise, it's worth it. Anyway, back in November 2022, Pokemon SV was released, being the entry games into Generation 9 and the series' big jump into a full open world structure. And on the lead up to the game's release, I wasn't particularly excited about them. I was looking forward, sure. I've never been much of a modern Pokemon hater, for the most part. But after Legends Arceus released earlier in the same year, and was already a drastic change from the series' usual format, I really wasn't feeling the need for more Pokemon so soon. I wanted them to just let Legends live for a while, maybe give us some extra DLC or something. It's not like I started liking Pokemon any less, or anything like that really, but it's like having too many slices of pizza. Yeah, pizza is one of the best foods on earth, but if you just keep getting slice after slice after slice, there'll come a point where it'll just be done. You might love pizza, but gosh darn it, after the 7th slice in a row, you start questioning what the point of pizza even is. Plus, SV came out at nearly the same time as Sonic Frontiers, and you know how excited I was for that game. Priorities were priorities, and I ended up not buying a mainline Pokemon game at release, something I hadn't done in a good while. And well, judging by the internet's reaction, I thought I kinda dodged a bullet there. The game was littered with bugs, and it seemed downright unfinished at times. People were bombarding Twitter with clips of hilariously dysfunctional moments in the game, and I really felt like I wasn't missing much. Pokemon really hadn't been the most polished recently, but the stuff I was seeing about SV just seemed preposterous. How did they allow the game to release in such a state? I thought to myself as I continued to play Sonic Frontiers. But after a while, the inevitable happened, and I decided to buy Pokemon Scarlet, the clearly superior version. And something strange happened. I ended up falling in love with it, really quickly. From the moment I set out into this game's world, I knew I was in for a ride. Yeah, this game runs very poorly, it can barely hold its stuff together at times. But it doesn't matter because it's so darn enjoyable! The beginning is a little slow, which is usually a bad thing, but as someone whose favorite games in the series were Sun and Moon, it honestly made me feel more at ease. They were taking their time with introducing every single one of the major characters, and that gave me some really nice flashbacks to what were probably the best written games in the whole series. Sorry, I don't make the rules. From the word go, I fell in love with each of the lovable dorks in this game. It really helps that SV takes another note from Sun and Moon and manages to make the dialogue actually feel natural and believable. We can elaborate this more in a future video, and I'm gonna take a jab at a fan favorite Pokemon story, but even Black and White, which took many steps forward in terms of storytelling in Pokemon games, kinda had this issue where the characters just sounded wooden and a little bit flat. Aside from their individual, straightforward character arcs, and besides that, of course, no one in BW really feels three-dimensional. They say what they need to say and move forward. I'm sorry if you disagree, but I don't really care for, say, Charon, who technically has a character arc, he develops, but it's such a point A to point B journey with so few actually memorable moments or quotes. What do we learn about Charon through the course of the game? He's kind of a serious guy who wants to get stronger, and I guess he's also smart. Let's compare this to one of the main characters in SV for a second. Nimona is a battle-crazy young girl who may seem to be one note at first, but she's actually a lot more packed than this. She's one of the strongest battlers she knows, and even clings to the player character since they showcase a talent for Pokemon battling. and might become someone who can have fun with at her full potential, and not because she's some sort of obsessive yandere internet. Plus, she's friendly, quirky, can't read social cues for the life of her, and enjoys excitement and adventures. Can you tell I really like her? There are also some really cool little details, like the fact that she doesn't seem to have the best stamina, even if she presents herself as sporty, or how she's not particularly talented at throwing Pokeballs, and had to train an unusually high amount to get the hang of it. As a side note, Nemona's enthusiasm for battles is hella contagious. She's a huge part of the reason why I'm now seriously getting into competitive VGC battles. I dare you to tell me one little quirk of Charon's that isn't directly associated with his immediate characterization. Any weird little thing he enjoys or isn't very good at. You know, anything that makes the character feel particularly real. Like he isn't just there to move the plot along and fill a gameplay role. And I'll be clear, this isn't a particular knock against Charon. I'd say he's in the upper echelon of writing for non-Gen 7 or 9 Pokemon characters. He's just an example, plain and simple, of how most Pokemon generations don't really give enough attention to their characters. I'd actually go deeper into other Gen 9 personalities, since they present my point even more strongly. But in the interest of keeping spoilers to a minimum, I'll just tell you to trust me on this one. This also extends to the dialogue writing itself and its own naturality. There's this section in the final story where all the main rival characters get to interact, and it's so great how they don't immediately get along and their personalities clash at multiple moments. They throw quips at each other, talk about their families, and mention how maybe the situation they're in seems a little too much like a video game plot. There's actual character here, chemistry, dialogue. It's not like the ensemble of rival characters in X and Y, where, there's this one guy who likes to dance, and that's like his one discernible character trait, and they collectively decide to give you a nickname of your choosing because, I don't know, because it's a video game, and they're video game characters who operate robotically in the service of the player, because that's what a video game character should do, right? As opposed to, you know, having any actual character. And this extends to characters with smaller roles as well. As a major part of this game's plot, your trainer is a student at an academy, and for no other reason than characterization, world building, and some minor tutorialization of deeper mechanics, you can take optional classes at this academy. They even have a light sort of social link system a la Persona. It's great! You may say I'm blathering on about characters and story in a Pokemon game for children too much, instead of talking about the gameplay itself. And don't worry, I'll get to that. But, and I know this can be subjective, this enhances the whole experience so much. Like it or not, at the end of the day, Pokemon is a JRPG. It's all about going to the next destination and making sure your numbers are high enough. What really sells this kind of game is the immersion. And especially in the case of Pokemon, the fantasy of it all. And that's partly the reason why Pokemon has worked so well without a story for so long. The fantasy itself is just super strong. Just being able to go around and build your own team of Pokemon can be interesting enough. Younger kids especially seem to be most interested in that. But that concept is really just a core, the central idea that drives the gameplay. Especially for older players who have a better grasp on how to play RPGs, that usually isn't quite enough. That's why the games can't just be a homogeneous repeat of the same idea forever. There's a reason why so many people think they don't like JRPGs after playing Pokemon. Then they play something with a more in-depth story and realize they just don't like Pokemon. And saying as someone who does like Pokemon, I can totally see where they're coming from. If that core fantasy isn't enough to hook you, you're not gonna be into some of the simpler games in the series. Heck, even I can get bored when replaying some of those, even if I mostly enjoyed them. After the second consecutive hour where nothing interesting happens and you're just pushing forward and spamming A during battles, you start to question your life choices a bit. And that's why the games usually need a few more pillars to actually stand up on their own. Be them unique and interesting locales, good music, engaging battles, and yeah, good writing. Those serve to both make each entry stand out in a sea of games that are built on essentially the same formula, but also serve to enhance the core fantasy itself, as well as make each game stand up quality-wise from that pre-established formula, making them something more than just another Pokemon game. I would much rather go on a Pokemon journey in a world with characters I actually care about, where I can seriously get immersed in being around these people and having an intrinsic motivation to see where each of their stories go and to spend more time with them, rather than one where the world feels like it's populated entirely by robots whose lives revolve completely around my 10-year-old character's actions, even when it doesn't feel appropriate. Yeah, both Sun and Moon and SV can get your character in some pretty intense situations, which are really great, but I wouldn't dare spoil, but it always makes sense, it always feels coherent. Playing these games, there's never a moment where I go, oh, a reasonable person would never say this, unless it's clearly intentional and meant as a joke. A common occurrence when trying to take the plots of pretty much every other Pokemon generation seriously. But yeah, a good story a perfect Pokemon game does not make. What about the other so-called pillars I mentioned? That's where my point stands. This is a title that can stand high on pretty much every quality we want a Pokemon game to have. I already mentioned the writing, but I also can't forget about the soundtrack. It has some great themes that range from calming to adventurous to exciting. Even Toby, Mr. Undertale, Fox works on a few tracks. It's some great stuff! But most importantly, this game really gets the world, as well as the overall structure, very right. This is the first truly open world game in the series, and it's formulated in a particular way to accommodate that. Of course, you still have to face 8 gyms and fight your way through the Pokemon League. But you also have 2 other storylines, with their own sets of objectives. There's the Teen Star story that surrounds this game's take on the traditional Pokemon antagonistic organization. They're not very evil this time around, but they're still very interesting, and I was very engaged throughout. There's also the Path of Legends with Orvin, where you hunt for some herbs that are being protected by these huge Titan Pokemon. Story-wise, it's way more interesting than that, but elaborating would spoil some things I really think most players would rather learn through the course of the story itself. Basically, all the storylines are great, but here's what makes it all so much cooler. You can do each of the objectives in any story, in any order you want. The levels don't scale, so there's probably a most efficient route. But where's the fun in that? For as good as the story finally is again in this game, SD also knows when to stop dragging you around and say, go! Do your thing! It's a great balance that even Sun and Moon couldn't strike, and that really manages to capture the whole Pokemon fantasy I was going on about before. This game leaves you at the helm of your own journey. You get to plan out your own decisions. Depending on what you want to do, sometimes you realize your team is not strong enough for the task, and that you have to prepare before facing this challenge, but never in a grindy sort of way. More in the, I'm gonna go somewhere else and do some other thing, until I'm strong enough to come back here and do this thing way. In general, this game can get pretty difficult, especially in the boss battles at the end of each story, and in the final section, unlocked after beating all of them. This is certainly a breath of fresh air in a franchise that tends to suffer from its own lack of difficulty. Progressing in this game actually takes critical thinking, which just enforces immersion. It makes you feel even more like you're on that Pokemon journey the game's selling you on. This is what I mean when I say this is Pokemon perfected. It's far from a perfect video game. It's glitchy, unpolished, and frankly, it's an insult to the consumer that it was released in the state that it was. But it's a perfect Pokemon game, because it gets every aspect of what makes the Pokemon experience rewarding so right. So, to everyone who's playing through, or plans to play through this game for the first time, the best thing I can say is, enjoy the ride, because this is genuinely a memorable, unique experience, far removed from the franchise's slow and kinda soulless low points. It stands out in a series that's so frequently criticized for being somewhat samey, as it achieves the feeling of an idealized Pokemon journey nearly perfectly. It's really a case of all the pieces falling into the right place. Aside from the technical issues and unpolishedness, there's not much I can really criticize about it. I love it. Yeah, that looks about right.